Signore e signori, buonasera. Welcome to Casa Italiana, Zerilli-Marimò. We are reaching the final act of Italian Screen Today in New York, in which Loredana Comunara and her staff present here in the city the best that contemporary Italian cinema has to offer, including the possible candidate for the Academy Awards, Vermiglio, and many others. And we are delighted to collaborate with Loredana with the precious work that she does for the promotion of Italian cinema here. And we are closing with a bang because we really wanted to have this film for a variety of reasons. Shakespeare, Re di Napoli, it's a film that talks about literature, talks about history, it talks a lot about Naples. And one of the main actors in the film is Jacopo Rampini, that we all love because Jacopo is a New Yorker, and he had a part of his career developing here. Now he's in Italy. And so it was a great occasion also to bring Jacopo back to the stage where he was at a very, very young age doing several different things. And we are delighted to now see him on the screen. As always, we are not going to tell you more about the film. You're going to discover it. With Jacopo, we were saying maybe just a warning that the language they speak is not really Italian. It's mostly Napolitan. So if you don't understand it, it's fine, because you probably did not study Napolitan in school. But there are the subtitles in English, and that should clarify everything. But before we start the screen, I would like to invite you to please welcome back to the Casa, Jacopo Rampini. Jacopo plays Shakespeare in the film.
Yes, that's me.
Yeah, that's you.
I play. I'd rather not say anything before the film, okay. But we can talk about it after you watch it.
So stay for the Q&A after.
Yes, thank you all for coming. Appreciate it.
Grazie. So while the final titles run, we start our conversation, and I hope you will be engaged. And I have many questions, and the first one is a very practical one. This is a very Napolitan film. It's much more about Naples than about Shakespeare, for example. And you're not Napolitan. That is clear from the film and also from your biography. How was it to be immersed in such a connotated working environment?
Well, first of all, my mom is from Naples, so technically. My mom is from Naples and my grandma is from Naples. So technically, I can claim.
I had no idea. Another piece of your biography that emerges.
Yes.
So when it's the mother, it counts more than anything else.
Right.
So they say.
No, but you're absolutely right, and obviously I wouldn't have been able to play any of the Neapolitan characters who play in this dialect, which I still struggle to understand. So every time I love. This must be, I think, the fifth time I see the film, and every time I sort of catch some new jokes or some new phrases in Neapolitan, which every time I'm sort of amazed at how musical and poetic the language is. And actually, with the English subtitles, it helps. It's vital, even for an Italian speaker.
Absolutely. And it's not the Napolitan from the street. It's a very rich Napolitan. So there are echoes of the daily language, but it's also very literary Napolitan. It reminds us that Naples had a tradition of texts written in that dialect. And so now we step back, and this is originally a theatrical piece, right? Jacopo, that has been around since 1994. Right. So it's 30 years, represented hundreds of times in theaters all over Italy, not only Naples. So it's really a cultural phenomenon for a theatrical piece to be able to remain on the stages for such a long time. What's with that theatrical piece? And then it became a movie. We're going to talk about that. What is so fascinating about that theatrical piece? First of all, have you seen it, or have you seen?
So unfortunately, I didn't see the play. I read the play. Yeah. Which was very difficult to read for me because it is all written in Neapolitan. So what's interesting, what you should know about the play is it only has two characters. So it's just Desiderio and Zoroastro retelling, right? Desiderio retelling the story. So everything else is imagined. So you can imagine sort of how talented the two actors who have to then recreate this entire universe and the story. And no, unfortunately, I didn't get to see the play, which there is one of the actors from the original play, the priest, who you see first young and then old, was one on the original cast. And somehow they thought it'd be a good idea to put, to transpose it into a film. And of course, adding the character of Shakespeare, adding so many other characters and so much to the story.
So basically, Jacopo, what the film did is taking the narrative provided by the two main characters and visualizing, making it real, giving it a present.
So like the scenes that you see, sometimes they're quite long, right? So you can tell this comes from a play because there's times where there's just two actors on the beach and they go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. That's where you see, and also going back to what you were saying about the language is literature because it does come from a play. Even my parts, when I got the script for Shakespeare, it was, the way he speaks is it's all poetry, right? And even seeing it today again, and this is something that the playwright Ruggero Cappuccio was really interested in doing, is this sort of fusion between the languages. So his idea is that Shakespeare came to Naples, right? And he fell in love with the sounds of Neapolitan, which obviously he didn't understand. But through the musicality of it, he was able to bridge that gap and then fall in love with the language and with the actor at the same time.
The actor that we saw is one of the two, and is one that played both female and male roles.
Yes.
Another thing about the play and the film is that about gender fluidity, is that years and decades before it existed, and Naples had a tradition for these cross-gender dynamics that dates back to the Middle Ages, probably.
Right.
So it's not something added because now it's fancy to have a presence, but because it's part of the very soul of Naples. True. And this acceptance of these. Can you tell us something about that?
Well, I don't know. To be honest, I don't know too much about that. I've read about it, but perhaps you know more. What I do know is that in Shakespeare time, of course, the women were played by men. In a sense, unfortunately, right? And so this character played by Emanuele Zappariello, who appears on the screen for the first time, he's a theater actor from Caserta. And he's got this incredible look, right? Because you'd see him in person. He's got this beauty that really transcends genders, Mm-hmm. So it is, in a sense, it is a very contemporary play and film. And like you said, it touches on things that were really true years and years ago.
Any question from our audience? I don't want to monopolize Jacopo while he's here. No?
So I'll give you just... Hello.
Laura Caparrotti.
I just want to give you some insight about the play. So I'm old enough...
Laura Caparrotti is the director of Cairo's Italy Theatre, so she knows a thing or two about theatre.
I think
and she's actually running right now this series of seminars on the history of Italian theatre here at the Casa. Grazie Laura, vai.
No, just to give an insight, I saw it so many years ago, that. But when it came out, it was like a big revelation. It was the 90s. We didn't have at the time a theater that was modern theater doing things in dialect. The dialect was considered kind of cheap theater, a lower kind, beside Edoardo. It was not like, now a dialect is very intellectual. At that time was not. And also the fact is to take Shakespeare and to recreate something. So it was considered completely revolutionary. Ruggero Cappuccio at that time was not a name. Now he's the director of the theater, the theater festival in Napoli for many, many years. And he does a lot of shows, he does movies and stuff. But at that time it was coming out and it was like this, everyone was talking about this play. So it was considered very revolutionary at the time. Just to give you an insight about that.
Grazie allora. Laura, in the two directors are the same directors of the play. That are also the directors of the film, Ruggero Cappuccio and Nadia Baldi.
Yes, Ruggero's the writer and also the director.
Okay.
Nadia, was also the director together with him. The fact that it starts, it started with a play. For me, it's really. Laura and I started working here on this stage many years ago, doing Italian plays, Boccaccio and La Mandragola in English. So for me, coming back here with a film that is also a play is really sort of going full circle. So it was a great honor. When I got picked to play this part, obviously as an actor, to be able to interpret Shakespeare and to be able to do your research. I've said this before. It's like going back to school, because you have to go back and obviously in acting school here in New York, I studied Shakespeare, but this was sort of like going back and finding out details about his life and rereading his plays and finding new meanings now that I had to interpret him on a film. And what was interesting, it was one of the plays was Romeo and Juliet, right? So I don't know if you saw, but there's that scene where I'm under the stage and he's reciting his last, and it's the last passages of Romeo and Juliet, and he dies as Juliet. And that was one of the plays that Ruggero Cappuccio suggested I revisit for this film, and it opened so many worlds. So it really was an incredible experience, and shooting it all in Naples as well. I often talk about this. They rented a real ancient ship, and we were filming in the Gulf of Naples. So it was really a dream come true.
And the interiors also were all palaces in Naples?
Yeah, so there was a palace in Caserta, we shot in Palinuro, we shot in so many different locations that I forget.
Not studios, they were real locations.
Yeah. Real locations, real beaches. The costume designer as well.
Extraordinary costumes, beautiful.
So all the pieces have been used in plays, in other period films. Really, really, really incredible.
Salim.
One of the things, I was brought up in Florence, so whenever I'd hear people speak in Napolitano, I would always not understand what they were saying. But I wondered when I was watching this film if in fact, English-speaking people, foreigners, Americans, whoever they are who are seeing it, if they're not actually being brought into the language of Naples, because it is so beautiful and musical. Because that's the thing about it. Even I, who still, I don't understand the language, I didn't read the subtitles because I felt like it was talking to me. And I think this is true, that, watching a film like this and seeing the whole, what's going on, that the language does speak to you, even if you don't understand Napolitano. I think it's just a universal thing, and the more you show it and the more places you show it, the more the beauty of that language and what's going on is going to be. I mean, I guess it's a very simple thing I'm saying, but it's not so simple because...
No, it's very deep, actually.
No, the thing that I was remembering was when I was young, trying to understand what people were saying, and as the more I listened to it, the more the language came to me. Yeah. It sounded so foreign. And the other thing that occurred to me was that I wondered if young Frankenstein, if Gene Wilder, because all of a sudden he came to me as one of the characters, and I wondered if in some way, the whole thing of Young Frankenstein wasn't some sort of a play on a larger sort of commedia. I don't know. It just he could have been right there.
It's one of the many
right?
interpretations of Frankenstein.
Right,
actually,
right. It was just. But thank you.
I'll ask the director if that was an influence.
If he saw it, if he thought that Gene Wilder would have been perfectly fit in this film. Thank you for it, though.
Yes, Ken. Kenneth Davies.
Thank you. It was wonderful, and we have to see it again. I don't know if we can arrange that, Stefano, but thank you very much. First, obviously, from an American perspective, one immediately thinks of Shakespeare in Love, and I wonder if that had been a factor in the creation of this. And my other experience of watching was how much I thought of Godot, Waiting for Godot, with these two characters on the beach dragging these things back and forth, and I wonder if that's just a reach or if that is a piece of what is going on here.
Again, we'd have to ask the playwright, who obviously has read Waiting for Godot, and I'm sure it was an influence. And you're right. One of the first times I watched it as well, this back and forth between these two characters reminded me for sure of Beckett's play.
It's very vaudevillian as well.
Yeah.
In Godot, and you have this very vaudevillian characteristics of these two actors.
And until the end, we don't know, right? He says, "Wait for the right time," right for the right time, and right at the end.
It is a lot of waiting involved there. Interesting.
Yes.
But thank you again.
As far as Shakespeare in Love, I thought it was a great film. Obviously, I've seen it many times. As an actor, you want to obviously be careful not to get too influenced by other performances. But somewhere that lives in my mind, that performance. So yeah, it was a great film. Yeah.
And finally, can you just give us a little bit more information about your own career? We'd like to know more.
Thank you. Well, like I was saying, I started in theater here in New York. I'm originally from Italy, but I have a background in literature. I graduated from the Sorbonne University in Paris. Came to New York and went to a school called the American Academy of Dramatic Arts, where I trained for 3 years, and then I started.
And you trained mostly as a stage actor, right?
Yeah. So you do very little camera work, and then I was lucky enough I got into the Williamstown Theater Festival in Massachusetts, where I played a very small role in Sam Gold's Doll's House with Lily Rabe, Josh Hamilton. And after that, I came back to New York and started doing a bit of off-Broadway plays and plays here at Casa Italiana, where I started. And then I started doing films, which I love because it allows you to use languages a lot, right? So I can act in Italian, in English,
and in French.
And in French. So it gives you and also, my parents, we sort of grew up between Europe and the U.S. So with film, it gives me the opportunity to go back to Europe and do films like this, and then bring him to America. So by the way, I want to say I'm very, very thankful for Stefano, who I've known for many years, and it was so kind to accept our film, and as well as Loredana, who I haven't known quite as long, but we've become good friends, and she was also very, very helpful in bringing the film.
This is the U.S. premiere, right?
Yes, I don't think it will ever be seen again after this.
So it's not the premiere; it's the unique.
It's unique. So it's actually it's interesting. It's in playing in Florence. So yes, a little context. It premiered at the Rome Film Festival last year, and then it took a year to get distribution. Don't ask me why. And now it's been. I saw it first in Naples. It was in Rome. When I go back, it'll be in Florence on the 9th, and I will be attending the premiere in Milan on the 16th. So now it's touring all over Italy, and hopefully some people will get to see it.
And the version in Italian for Italian theaters has absolutely no subtitles?
No subtitles. So, the first time I saw it, I couldn't understand half of the film. And then, like I said, little by little, like the last time I saw it in Rome, I finally laughed at one of the scenes because I got it. It took me a while, but I think that's part of what makes me love watching this film over and over again, is I discover something new every time I watch it. So,
and the fact that the play was so successful with just two characters, it was like all over Italy for all these years, and like in 5 different theaters in Rome. I mean, it's a testimony that this surreal element, the vaudeville, the multiplicity of different genres inside this has a potential, and there is a public for it in Italy. And if there is the public for it in the theaters, there must be also in cinema. I would have considered subtitles, at least for some of them. But it's a very philosophical thing. When Ermanno Olmi finishes Albero degli Zoccoli, the Tirature and Clogs, all in Bergamasco, that is probably the most obscure dialect in Italy. When Italo Calvino in The Baron in the Trees has to find a language that nobody understands, he picks Bergamasco. And Olmi shoots the entire film for a year. He's in this farmhouse in Bergamo. And there was a debate because he didn't want to put subtitles in Italy. But the people in Rai, because it was produced Rai, they said, nobody's going to understand anything. So they went on and on and on, and there were versions in some theaters with subtitles and some others with no subtitles.
Wow.
But there is that phenomenon that Sally was referring to, that if you let yourself being taken by the stories, and in that film actually not much happens in terms of events and facts. It's more like being in the rhythm, in the pace of an agricultural society. There is a little miracle of the languages in the sense that even if you do not understand word by word what they say, you understand what they're doing, what they're feeling. So it happens.
Look at Vermiglio.
There you go.
Anche in dialetto.
L'hai visto tu,
Sì,
Jacopo?
e purtroppo non ancora. No. Tutto, però mi hanno detto che è tutto in dialetto.
Tutto in dialetto.
Sì.
Complicatissimo.
Vermiglio. Davide, in che dialetto? In quale dialetto è Vermiglio? Trentino. Davide Politi. Sì.
Napoletano che me, non so se capite in italiano, se lo dico in inglese, ma napoletano che me, due precisazioni.
Vai.
1500 Napoli era la capitale culturale d'Europa sotto gli aragonesi, era l'asse culturale Napoli-Parigi, quindi il teatro napoletano era poi quello che ha ispirato anche il cinema americano, perché era proprio, nasceva dall'improvvisazione, ma poi aveva tutto la sua. E poi la seconda cosa, se mi sono perso qualcosa, era una precisazione che proprio nel teatro napoletano, e questo è stato ripreso dal teatro inglese di Shakespeare, le donne non potevano recitare, quindi servivano gli uomini che recitavano le due fun fact.
Ma io ero curioso, c'è qualcun altro oltre a Davide che parla o capisce il napoletano?
Scusa, terzo fun fact, il cantante più ascoltato in Italia è Joliet, che canta il napoletano stretto.
Il neomelodico.
Bene, perché sentivo, I kept hearing people laugh and I was like,
there must be somebody who
there must be some
understands
Italians in the room.
Neapolitans.
What? No, I know. But I don't know if the jokes land as well, and sometimes I was curious. I kept watching for that because the translation is not easy with a text of this sort. Yeah. Anyway,
Yes, we have two questions back there. John, and then behind John, I don't see.
How can I ask you about what you might have done differently in your preparation for this? With this speech, your character's speech was kind of an elevated register, right? It was not just regular. Can you talk about that sort of preparation for you as an actor, as opposed to like your work on Blacklist or FBI and some of the other, what you had to do to prepare differently specifically for this role and for these takes, and your work with the director?
thank you. Thanks for that question. Yeah, I mean, obviously, when you're working on something like this, it's like going back to. I think what worked for me is that I do have a background in literature, right? Before becoming an actor, I wanted to be a poet. It's a true story. I know you laugh, but it's true. And so something about the language of poetry, which I still remember. I used to love memorizing poems, and I still do to this day. And so what I was looking to do with this character, and when I got the script, it was, you said, so dense. I'll admit to something. I'm still not entirely happy with the way some of it. And what was difficult is working with a director who didn't speak perfect English. So he was just like, go and do your thing. And with a character like this, you also want direction, right? Because it's not easy with the language, the way it was written, and also keep in mind that it was a translation from the Italian. So my English had been I'd been translated from the Neapolitan, from the Italian, and yeah, what I tried to look for it was the musicality, the music in the words. And trying to give justice to this character, obviously. So I do think that I much prefer text like this over TV shows where you have a couple of lines and you say, "Hey, I'm Nick. Nice to meet you." You know, but it's different. It's almost like going back to doing theater when you do this. So it is great to have a background in theater where you've had to do. I played Iago and Othello in school. You know, where you have this language that is you know, you have to work so hard to get it right. So that definitely helped in preparing for this role. Yeah.
I think we have our last question.
There's something, you know, so primal about this film. Just, I mean, I don't know when the play was written, but
94?
in '94, yeah, but it's older. You know, you know, whether it's Waiting for Godot, whatever, you know. But even before that, there's something like very primal, ancient about the feeling of the kind of that characterization of ancient Italian theater characters, the masks. You know, some of it is reflected in the costuming, but I'm wondering whether the screenwriter, and I know, you know, it's not your writing, but you know, what the background of the writer is, basically, I guess.
And the writer is Roberto Cappuccio?
Ruggero
Cappuccio, sì.
To be honest, unfortunately, I don't have really the answer to your question. But it is, you know, it is a period piece. It is written in old Italian, old Neapolitan, and old English. So perhaps that's where the, you know, your feeling of something being primal is the word you used. Even more ancient than those times.
Even the names of the two original protagonists are like evoked like an antiquity that predates Christianity, and
I don't have the answer. I would have to ask the playwright.
No, but that's totally fine. I think these are suggestions that I'm glad somebody caught, and probably the director would be very pleased and flattered if
if the playwright were here.
This conversation in New York, and we were discussing.
And he's a very distinguished man who you would use the word in English like he has an old soul. So. Perhaps some of his upbringing and his background sort of indicates that, you know, the way informs the way he writes, you know, and maybe that's where you're getting that feeling, you know. I wish he could be here to give you more insights on the writing.
Well, you're telling me that we had a very interesting discussion about his possible sources.
Yes, I will.
Well, Jacopo, grazie mille. Thank you very much for bringing us this film. And before we go, since for this edition is our last evening with Italy on Screen Today, I would like to thank once again Loredana Comunara for all the work that she does, not only to bring Italian films here in New York, but she has a beautiful film festival in Ventotene. Next year is going to be the 30th edition. I've been already there twice. It's amazing what she's able to do in one of the smallest islands in Italy. It's long, 1 mile only, right, Loredana? And it's an island with a fantastic history. That's where the very idea of a united Europe was born, right during fascism, in the middle of World War II, when all Europe was like, Europeans were killing each other. These political exiles from fascism in Ventotene, in the small island, had the audacity to think of a united Europe. And in that small island, Loredana is able to create a film festival. So for a week, there are films not only from Italy, but from other parts of the world. There is a section dedicated to the environment and many other things. Loredana, you're doing a great job both here and in Italy, and for this we're very, very grateful. Thank you.